Philippians chapter 1. We're just going to take some time over the next couple Sundays just to explore Paul's letter to the church in Philippi, to this group of believers. And there's this overarching theme that I just see that I love in the book of Philippians, and it's about joy and having a sense of overflowing joy. So we're just going to explore a little bit of that today. Now, I'm going to meddle a little bit with you, and if you have a spouse with you, this makes it a little bit easier. Maybe if a child's here, like my children like to point out things about me all the time. But I just like you to analyze your life for a moment and really consider it. Do you find yourself, are you more of a glass half full person or a glass half empty kind of person? When you look at life, do you see the problems or the possibilities? Are you a glass half full? Well, it's a little more than half full. Or half, and now it's going to bother me. That's a little better. Half full, half empty. Because some of you are looking at me like, Mark, that was 2/3 full. And you're like, see, my wife was. And the engineer in me is like, I should have really marked that right there in the middle to get, but watch this all publicly fall apart right now. Are you glass half full, half empty? Do you see the promise, the problems, or the possibilities? If you're handed a basket of lemons, do you make lemonade? Or you do, what do I do with these yellow balls? What do you do? How do you view life? Half full, half empty. When everything is bleak, when everything feels dark to you, how do you keep your spirits up? And that's different for everybody. And it's a different area for everybody. Because some people are impacted differently by everything we face. Right now with the pandemic, it affects people differently. Like the extroverts hated the shutdown quickly. Why? Because you're extroverts and you need to extrovert. And you need to talk and communicate and be with people. And then the introverts were like, this is heaven. Because now everything's shut down and I don't have any obligations. I can just enjoy life. But even I've found talking to introverts even now over the quarantine that even they're starting to go a little bit of stir crazy because they're starting to miss people and they're starting to miss activities and events. But it could be that, or it could be anything. And you can just take your life and look at it. Like sometimes finances never bother me because I've always seen God provide. So even when money's tight, it doesn't really faze me. I'm just like, God will provide. And so it doesn't bother me. But you can go to different areas of life that might not bother you, but then for me, it would drive me crazy. And some of us are like that. So the area could be different that you face that could be dark to you, that might not bother me, that might not but does bother you. But how do you handle it? Now, I've found that it's always easier to be up when you've had past victory or success in an area. Because you've been there, you're like, hey, this is hard right now, but God has taken care of me in the past in a similar situation, or maybe even in the exact same situation, and it's easy for me to be up because I've seen what God can do. Now, it's a lot harder to be up in those moments you've never walked through before. Where you've gone your whole life and you've never had any real physical issues, and then all of a sudden you get to a point and your body breaks down on you and you're like, what do I do now? I've never experienced this before. Or something happens in your life and you're like, I've never walked this before. And so then sometimes when we've never experienced that, it's easier for us to be down because we don't have any hope. But when everything is bleak, what do you do to keep your spirit up? A psalmist writes this in Psalm 42:5. Why are you cast down, O my soul? You ever looked at yourself and you've looked at yourself and you're like, man, why am I in a bad mood? Why am I bummed out? Why am I so sad? That's what the psalmist is writing. Why are you cast down, O my soul? And why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in God, for I shall again praise him, my salvation and my God. He's like, you're bummed out. You're down. You want to get up. You're looking at yourself, you're analyzing, I'm down. Why am I so down? I need to shift my hope back to Jesus, because when I'm close to Jesus, suddenly my spirits rise. I pump up because of my hopes in him, and suddenly I find myself up. Now, the one thing we want to do is approach life with joy. And it isn't so much more fun to approach life with joy, because none of us like being around people that are not full of joy. Because you can all look at your lives and you know the crabby people in your life. That they will find anything to be crabby about. And even if you solve that problem, they've moved on to the next thing to be crabs about. There's just no joy there. They're just crabs. And they're not fun to be around. They take the air out of a room when they come into it. They can ruin your whole day. I would not want to be a customer service representative, especially somebody dealing with internet when every child in America is having to learn from school from home and then their internet goes out. Can you imagine what that's like with people calling? I would not want to have that job. But we want to approach life with joy. Now, the dictionary definition of joy is a very glad feeling, great pleasure, delight. Now, that's close to the biblical definition of joy, but it's not the exact definition of joy. From a biblical perspective, joy is similar to happiness, but happiness depends on our circumstances. All the time. If I were to be like Oprah or Ellen or one of those other TV shows where and you'll have a TV, and you'll have a TV, and you'll have a new car, and you'll have a new car, and you'll have a lake house, and you'll have this, and you'll have a trip to Europe. If I were to come and do that, I would imagine most, if not all of us, would be like they are in those shows, and we're like, woo, we're jumping up and down, we're going crazy. Would that not be the case? And I remember a few years ago, the Oprah show, she was giving out cars to everybody in her audience, and they all got these new cars, and then a few weeks later, they got a tax bill for the gift of the car. I would imagine they, in that moment, were not so happy because their circumstances were different. Because when she handed them the car keys, that was happiness. When the IRS shows up with the tax bill, not happy. When you do your taxes, you're happy when you get a refund, you're not happy when you owe. Happiness from our human perspective is based on our circumstances. From a biblical perspective, it's not dependent on circumstances. It's our relationship with God. Joy is more a state of being than an emotion. It is a result of choice. I choose joy. Joy is gladness born of a personal relationship with God because God has given me everything that I need. In fact, joy is the product of God's work in me as I mature in my faith. Galatians 5:22 and 23. It's a fruit, it's a product of the Spirit at work in my life as I mature in God. It develops joy. Joy does not depend on what happens to me, but is my response to what happens to me. I mean, James writing in James chapter 1, verse 2, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Why? Because testing produces perseverance. As we face a trial, it helps us to grow and to mature and to become stronger in our faith. Now, is there anybody here that says, joy is my natural response to a difficulty? We don't do that. I would imagine most of you last March when they said, you can't go here, you can't go here, you can't do this, your response was probably not joy, it was probably more like, why? Or seriously? Or this is ridiculous. And then some of you are just like, I'll take my mask, I'll wear it. Others are like, I'm not wearing that thing. And then you're just like, we battle over the mask, we do everything else. Our response is not joy. When we face a difficulty, that's not our natural response. Here's James saying, consider it joy when you face that difficulty. Or Psalms chapter 66, verse 1. Shout for joy to God, all the earth. It's a choice. Shout for joy. I'm going to shout joyfully to my God. Or Paul, writing to the Philippians in chapter 4, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. I approach life with joy. So Paul writes a very joy-filled letter to a group of Philippians, a church that he has planted, that he has invested in. He writes them a letter. Where's he write them the letter from? His lake house. He's kicking back at the lake house. He's having a great time. He's having some nice iced tea, and he's just enjoying it. He's got a lemonade on one side of it, a nice tea on the other. He's just, man, I am living the life of a traveling evangelist. He's like, life is good. I'm writing books. They're published. This is great. I'm thinking about getting my own jet. I'm going to travel everywhere. This is going to be awesome. I'm going to have a great time proclaiming God's word to everybody, and I'm going to be a superstar when I show up. People are going to be lined up for blocks just to see me. It's going to be awesome. And so he's writing the letter from there, and I just totally lied to you. Paul's writing the letter from prison. In fact, most likely, he's tied up to a guard. He's not even allowed to be in a little cell by himself. He actually has somebody there physically with him, chained to him for 3 hours a day, swap somebody out every so many hours. Now, I would imagine there were a lot of guards that gave their lives to Jesus after experiencing Paul that closely. And there were probably some other guards that were like, man, do I have to really go here? So he's writing there. He's not in this, woohoo, life is good, life is great, this is awesome moment. It's a very difficult place for him that he's writing a letter. And yet in chapter 4, he says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. Totally opposite to how we would be. And even in the tone of his letters, we'll look at a portion of it in a moment, even the tone of the letter is not like, woe is me, this is horrible, life is hard, this stinks, this is miserable, somebody come rescue me, get me out of this situation. He doesn't even do that. I mean, it's a group of people that he loves very much. On one of his missionary journeys, and you see this in Acts, I believe it's chapter 16, they travel into the community and they get to Philippi, and it's a regional trade city, kind of like St. Louis, where there's a lot of activity going on, reaching out into the communities around it. There he goes, and he starts looking for opportunities to share the gospel. And one day, he has the opportunity to meet an individual named Lydia, and her whole household get saved. It's awesome. They start having Bible studies. And one day, him and Paul and Timothy and Silas and those guys are just out ministering. And as they're walking along, they see a young girl that is a slave, and she has this demon in her that helps her tell the future for people, and Paul gets real annoyed that this poor girl is being treated as an object, not a human. She's being enslaved and miserable, and Paul just prays for her, and she is set free, and it's an awesome moment for that young girl, and the guy that owned her was not happy, and so he's mad because he lost a revenue stream in that moment, and so he wants to take it out on Paul, and so Paul gets arrested. Paul and Silas are thrown into prison. They're beaten. Then they're locked up in prison. They're locked up in stocks so they can't even move. They can't lay down. They're forced just to sit. They're in a miserable situation. And then if you've read Acts chapter 16, all you know is they sat there and they're like, woe is me, God. This is horrible, God. We were trying to preach for you, Jesus, and look what you made happen to us. Again, I lied to you. Acts chapter 16, they have proclaimed Jesus. They have been locked up. They have been beaten before that. They are up all night, and their response is to worship and pray, so much so that everybody in the prison hears what's going on. They hear the worship. They hear the praise. They hear them talking and sharing their theological thoughts as God's given it to them, probably ministering to other individuals that are around them in the dark there as they're ministering and worshiping and singing and praising God. Even in the midst of their horrible situation, there was joy. And then the craziest thing happens, an earthquake. An earthquake happens that had to have been a little bit supernatural because it caused all the chains to fall off, all the doors to open, all the stocks to break free that are holding them pinned there, so all the prisoners in the whole place are set free. Hey, there's something about the power of Jesus to set souls free. So here, they're set free. And then the warden's like, I'm in trouble because it's not going to go very well with my bosses, with the political leaders when something happens and my entire prison of criminals is emptied out. And so he's rightfully concerned for his own life. And so Paul ministers to him, and then that whole individual and his whole household comes to faith in Jesus. And then Paul is snuck out of town. I mean, he's in Philippi a very short time, but God was already, a revival's breaking out there because you have all these prisoners that come to faith. You have all the people that have come to take care of the prisoners because they didn't have the system we do now where you had to bring food and stuff into the prisoners to take care of them or they would die in their cells. So you have them sharing with their family, this is what happened. There was this guy, Paul, and there's Silas here, and they were worshiping God, and they were proclaiming him, and then they get saved. And I'm sure there's this ripple effect there on top of all the people that Lydia and those other believers are leading to the Lord. So a church has formed, and Paul writes a letter to that church after he finds himself traveling around preaching the gospel, and he's in prison again for proclaiming Jesus, and he writes this to them. Philippians chapter 1, starting at verse 3, and I'm sharing it from the Message version just to give it a little bit of a different flavor for you as you listen. Every time you cross my mind, I break out in exclamation of thanks to God. Each exclamation is a trigger to prayer. I find myself praying for you with a glad heart. I am so pleased that you have continued on in this with us, believing and proclaiming God's message from the day you heard it right up to the present. There has never been the slightest doubt in my mind that God, who started this great work in you, would keep at it and bring it to a flourishing finish on the very day Christ Jesus appears. Verse 7, it's not at all fanciful for me to think this way about you. My prayers and hopes have deep roots in reality. You have, after all, stuck with me all the way from the time I was thrown in jail, put on trial, and come out of it in one piece. All along, you have experienced with me the most generous help from God. He knows how much I love and miss you these days. Sometimes I think I feel as strongly about you as Christ does. Verse 9, so this is my prayer, that your love will flourish and that you will not only love much, but well. Learn to love appropriately. You need to use your head and test your feelings so that your love is sincere and intelligent, not sentimental gush. Live a lover's life, circumspect and exemplary, a life Jesus would be proud of, bountiful in fruits from the soul, making Jesus attractive to all, getting everyone involved in the glory and praise of God. I mean, you can sense the sense of joy as he writes that. You can sense his love. You can sense this purpose, this mission, this heart coming out of him as Paul pens that letter to these believers. He's not looking at life half empty. He's looking at it full. So how do I live up when I'm feeling down? How do I stay upbeat when I'm feeling beat down? How do I do that? A couple things that I noticed as in Paul's writing, as he's writing to these Philippians, is one, be thought wise. Or put another way, choose your thoughts wisely. Where do you choose to look? Do you look at what I have, or do I look at what I don't have? How do I choose to analyze the situation? How do I choose to look at things? Now, when we're stressed, when we're strained, we tend to often default to selfishness. Now, one of the guys I think about that's so prevalent in the Bible is a guy named Esau. And he gave up his whole blessing. He gave up his whole destiny because he spent a few days hunting. He's really hungry. He's really tired. He didn't have enough to make a meal. So he gets home and he's starving and he trades his future destiny. He trades everything away for a bowl of soup because he was just tired and he wasn't. And if we're not careful, that can happen to us. When we get selfish, when we get strained, we immediately look at the top. I don't have this. This is what's going on, and I'm miserable. And we forget about the other part, what I do have. Our thought life is very important. How we're thinking, how we're processing things, it's critical. If we're going to keep our spirits up, we have to think right. We have to be thought wise. I mean, Paul reveals this in chapter 4 of the letter. He just says, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's in any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about such things. Basically, he's saying, look at this part and think about that part. Quit concentrating so much on this part. Think wise. And then be action-wise. Choose your response. Be action-wise. Who do I control? I control me. And when I'm in a situation, I control how I will respond to that situation. I control my attitude. I control my expressions. I control my words. I mean, here we have Paul. He is joyfully praying. That's a vertical. He's just vertical. Me and God, I'm joyfully praying. I'm joyfully seeking your face. Even though I'm suffering, even though I'm having hardship, my response is praise and worship because I'm looking at what I have in Jesus and who Jesus is instead of concentrating on what I'm facing and what's going on. I'm concentrating on that. And so it's worship there. But then his communication horizontally to people was also full of life and encouragement and instruction because he's like, love well, grow in your relationship with God. Thank you for partnering with me in this mission. Let's do what we can together to reach as many people as we can together. He's like encouraging them and strengthening them. He's choosing his response. Sometimes for us, a change of place or a change of pace can really help us change our perspective. So sometimes when we're facing a really difficult thing, just taking a moment just to step back or step away and to reevaluate and relook at things can help so much. Then the next thing is be thankful for the who and the what in your life. Because Paul's response to them is, I'm thankful to you. He's looking at this part. He's not focused on, well, here's my situation, here's all my needs, here's all the ways I'm hurting, here's what's going on, here's all the holes in our ministry, here's all the things that need to take place. Instead, he's looking back and he's like, I'm thankful for what I have. He's thankful. So be thankful for the who in your life and the what in your life. Be thankful for that and express your gratitude. Then be close to God. See? I knocked my Y down. Be close to God. The basics matter. The basics matter. Paul, facing all these troubles that he faced, didn't stop the basics. He kept studying. He kept praying. He kept seeking God's face. He kept being near God. He kept encouraging people. He kept teaching people even when he had already left that area and gone to another area of ministry. He's still pouring into people's lives of where he was before. We want to make sure that we're close to God. That's why prayer, worship, Bible study are important. Rest, diet, and exercise are important too. Taking an actual Sabbath is good for us. Taking a moment to rest is good for us. Going all the time, full 90 miles an hour, day in and day out, is not the best for us. Even God knows that. So he's like, hey, one day a week, chill. One day a week, relax. There's a moment where it's good to take a nap, but there's also a moment that it's good to get up and actually do something. Be close to God. Allow God to work in areas of your life that you normally keep closed off to Him, that you normally ignore. And sometimes when we face a new situation, that's where God can work because we've maybe had areas in our lives that we haven't ever had to deal with before, and we get into this new situation where we're facing all new things, all new trials, all new struggles, and hey, it's a great opportunity then to be like, okay, God, see if there's anything offensive in me and lead me in the way of everlasting. God, you see me in this new situation, so let's deal with things that I might have ignored in the past because I didn't have to deal with them, but let's just work in those areas today. Then I need to move to be aware of the reality. Paul was aware of the reality of what was going on. He didn't ignore it. He was aware of the reality of what was going on with his friends. He didn't ignore it. But he didn't allow that reality to control him. So we don't want to ignore reality. Because, hey, if I don't go to the dentist for 20 years, that doesn't mean I'll never get cavities. It just means I don't know I have cavities. I'm ignoring reality. But I go to the dentist and find out I have cavities, and what's that mean? I get a little bit of dental work, but my mouth's going to feel a lot better afterwards. My pocketbook, not so much, but my mouth definitely. But if just because I ignore going to the dentist does not change the reality of what the condition of my teeth are. So I don't ignore reality, but I'm not controlled or manipulated by the situation of the reality. But then I take the time to introduce my reality to God. I'm sure there were moments where Paul's just praying, hey, God, here's the situation I'm facing. This is what's going on. This is what's been done to me. And he's sharing that with God, but he's not just shut down. He's sharing. I mean, there's one scripture verse that says, don't be anxious about anything, but do what? Pray. But what do you do before you pray? What do you do before you speak? You inhale. You take a breath. You just take a moment to breathe. And sometimes we ignore that reality of just slowing down. And taking a moment just to breathe, just to rest, just to be refreshed by Jesus, just to inhale. And then just going, Jesus, this is what's going on. I'm anxious, I'm worried, I'm stressed, I'm consumed with this part. But I know that you have it all under control. So I'm just taking a moment to breathe and to rest in your presence and just say, Jesus, help me. And then the thing I love that Paul did to the Philippians, he's going through a lot, but he reminds them of the importance to be on mission together. Be on mission together. Don't go at it alone. Here's the reality. If I go at it alone, I'll always remain alone. So seek help from the right person, the right place. Do life together. Be on mission together. Because everything's better together. Everything's better when we can share about what God's doing and we can encourage and strengthen each other. And then a final reminder of what to do. How do I think right? How do I view things glass half full instead of glass half empty? How do I keep my spirits up? How do I allow myself to be full of joy? Be active. Don't shut down. Don't shut down. Be active. Paul had every reason to just shut down. He's locked in prison. He's preached and he's kicked out of towns. He's rejected. He's pushed away. He's beaten. His body's broken down. He's tired. He's exhausted. He had every reason just to stop and just say, I'm done. I quit. But he didn't. He kept at it. Be active. Don't shut down. Take a deep breath. Take a first step and start moving. But don't shut down. Don't shut down. When I see what God is doing, when I get the big picture, joy will begin to flow. When I step back and I'm like, okay, God, I'm not going to just keep looking at myself anymore. I'm going to look to you. I'm going to trust in you. I'm going to hold on to you. And when you can step back and you can allow yourself to see what God is doing and see how God is working and see your part in that, even though it's difficult and it's hard, joy will begin to flow because joy will begin to transcend the circumstances that I face. God, I'm holding on to you. God, I'm trusting you. God, I'm relying upon you. And God, I'm not giving up. I'm going to keep going until the very end. I'm going to keep going until you call me home and take me to be with you. I'm going to keep going because it's going to be awesome when I get to be there with you in eternity. That's going to be awesome. But between now and then, you've given me the opportunity to live for you and to represent you in this world. And I'm not going to give up that opportunity. So I'm going to choose to rejoice always. I'm going to choose to be full of joy.